Welcome to Myanmar Musings, a podcast of the Myanmar Research Centre at the Australian National University, Canberra. It is November 19, 2020, and today we are bringing to you a recording of a webinar that was held earlier this afternoon called After the Polls, a discussion on Myanmar's COVID-19 election. The webinar was moderated and convened by Jonathan Liljeblad, Senior Lecturer at ANU, and the Q&A was moderated by Mick Cheeseman. The four participants are Sumon Thant, Nicholas Ross, Myate Thitsa, and Maitri Ong Twin. A more thorough introduction of each panellist is given in the webinar. One note is that this is a digitally recorded webinar, so audio quality does vary between participants. We ask for your patience and make sure you turn your volume up. Without further ado, I hand over to Jonathan.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today to the webinar on the Myanmar elections, hosted by the Australian National University College of Asia Pacific. My name is Jonathan Liljeblad. I'm a senior lecturer at the ANU College of Law. I'm a scholar in rule of law, human rights, and environmental issues with fieldwork focused primarily in Myanmar. I was born in Myanmar, and so it is a continuing concern of mine, and so I'm pleased to welcome my colleagues here. Before I introduce my colleagues today and discuss the format of the session, I want to acknowledge country. So I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon whose places we meet. For the campus of the Australian National University, this is on the land that belongs to the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples. We acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded or surrendered and continues to be a continuing issue within the country and society of Australia. We want to acknowledge and pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging, and we will keep them in our minds as we proceed today with the session. So I want to introduce the speakers that we have featured today, all of whom are firsthand experts about Myanmar and the issues that are continuing in the country, and who have been tracking the elections that occurred recently. I will begin by introducing Ma Sumon Thant. She's a researcher who is currently in Yangon, and she has done work in the past for the Carter Center, the Enlightened Myanmar Research Foundation, and International IDEA. Her expertise is prominently on the results of the election at the union level, and we are relying upon her today to talk about the union level election results, as well as to present a firsthand perspective of someone who is currently inside the country. The second speaker I want to introduce today is Myate Thitsa. She is the co-founder of the Enlightened Myanmar Research Foundation. She is currently studying her PhD in Global Studies program at the University of Massachusetts Lowell. She does research on parliaments and federalism and conflicts, and she has been tracking the Myanmar elections at the state and region level. The third speaker is Maitri Ong Twin, who's a historian and specializing in Myanmar. He's associate professor of history at the National University of Singapore, and we are relying upon him today to sort of help place things in context with respect to past Myanmar politics and sort of the longer term issues or implications of what's taking place in Myanmar now. Last is Nick Ross. He is a PhD candidate within the College of Asia Pacific at ANU. He has extensive experience with working with NGOs and peace building and democratization in Myanmar, and his research currently is dealing with ethnic issues and political parties and armed group politics within Myanmar. So I want to thank all of four speakers for coming today and presenting your perspectives, and I trust that you'll provide a very informative session for the rest of us, and hopefully we can all learn from your expertise. Regarding the format of today, we're running for 90 minutes total. We want to provide a broad discussion upon different issues. But for the purposes of organization, we're following a progression of three broad themes. So the first broad theme is dealing with the actual election results. So this is a lot of the statistical information, the data, and trying to understand what were the trends and patterns that emerged out of the election results, and what is it that the international community should be aware of. The second thematic area is with the controversies that occurred during the election process itself. So this is sort of the issues that arose during the campaigns, the problems that were noted by domestic and international observers, and sort of what the meaning is, or what the reflection of those controversies is for the internal political, social, cultural, economic issues within Myanmar in a broader level. The last element is trying to understand or make sense of the election for the future, and trying to understand the implications of the election, both in the near term for the National League for Democracy and the larger country as a whole, and then in the longer term with the prospects for what will happen going for the 5-year, 10-year mark, et cetera, both for Myanmar domestically, but also for the international community responding to Myanmar. So regarding question and answers, we are taking questions and answers as we go. They will be curated by my colleague, Nick Cheeseman, who's at RegNet, at the College of Asia Pacific. We will collect the questions and address them at the end of the webinar today. So we are allowing time at the end to address and answer and discuss prompts, questions, concerns that you may have. And so we welcome your thoughts, and we would invite you to type your questions into the Q&A box in the text area. And if that does not work, you can also raise your hand and see if you would like to make or pose your questions verbally. In which case, Nick will be available to go ahead and help convey or deliver your questions to us during the Q&A period at the end of the webinar. So let us begin talking about the election results. And I would like to begin with Sue Monthan, talking about what occurred at the union level and sort of what her observations are and what her thoughts are with the union level election results. So Masu, would you like to provide us with your comments?
Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss the 2020 elections. We see similar patterns as in 2015 elections, where the NLD won the majority in national legislature and also in majority of regional assemblies. So this time it's the same pattern, except for a few ethnicities in Shan, in Gaya, in Kachin. These areas are a bit more diverse. So the official results show that NLD won 83% of the elected seats in national legislature. The main opposition, USDP, only got around 7%, which is a 1% decrease from 2015. And same for the whole ethnic bloc. Now they can make 9.9% in the national legislature, but compared to 2015, is more than 1%, like around 2% decrease in the national legislature. If we look at the number of political parties, the numbers are approximately the same, because we got 22 winning parties in 2015. Now we got 19 winning parties in 2020. But the opposition is weaker than in 2015. That we can see from this election result. So this result means for the whole ethnic bloc that they are again junior partner, although they expected to be the kingmaker. And also this result also show the commitment and the vote confidence for the NLD as well. So this result confirmed the voting behavior of Myanmar voters hasn't changed very much since 2015, which is either follow the charismatic leader, or they reject the parties which are associated with the previous military regime. So there are many reasons why NLD won landslide. And so like media coverage, incumbent advantage, and the resourceful campaign, etc. I think two factors are stood out in this election. One is the electoral system, FPTP system, because in FPTP system, the contacts matter. So here are the few contacts. The first is that voters are not voting for the local representative. They are actually indirectly choosing the president. So the electoral votes for the national legislature can determine which party forms the government, which party appoints the president and controls the executive. So this contrast was used by the NLD as their campaign message. And here are more contacts that the military comprise 25% in the legislature, and 2020 elections are also like a chance for voters to choose a government which would defend the democracy, which would balance the power of the military, rather than choosing a new government with the new policy agenda. So actually NLD used the whole context and put it in their campaign messages. And that is the one advantage of this campaign. And there is another reason, another factor is the long-term horizon times. I can see that, so one of the pre-election survey shows that majority of voters, they know only two parties, either USDP or the NLD. And some of the candidates we interview also, they feel like they are competing with the state councillor John San Suu Kyi rather than they competing against the other party. Voters know the NLD, and voters have know the leader. A voter has this long-term personal ties with the party. But it wasn't a total loss for ethnic parties, I must say, because ethnic parties were able to capture all the available seats, the current and the last election, because of the vote split and because of the passive lack of unity. In one study in 2015, one study showed if ethnic parties march, then they can gain more. They can gain more 17 seats, 17 seats. After parties march in 5 ethnic areas, they could actually secure 18 more seats that they current in the 2015. So yeah, of course, the rest are like to win the majority, etc. are also related to other factors. So now we got like 19 winning political parties in the in both national and state legislature, of which 17 are ethnic parties. So in terms of the number of ethnic parties, it is actually increased compared to 2015. This also means that according to the previous arrangement, this also could mean that these 17 ethnic parties can represent in the peace dialogue as well. I think that if we look at the numbers and the pattern, then it doesn't seem, we don't see much changes, but actually there are improvements. I see it as a development. Thank you.
Thank you. Mamyat,
so thank you very much. I'm really glad to be here. So as I myself and MREF always put emphasis on states and region parliaments, now I want to highlight the results at the states and region level. So when it comes to states and region level, our emphasis is more on the competition between major parties like NLD and USDP and ethnic parties. We normally more interested to learn about states. So we can say that states are expected by ethnic minorities to be their stronghold, right? So in this 2020 elections, as Sumon already mentioned, ethnic political parties actually put a lot of efforts in terms of mobilization, gathering all of their strength, through party marches, and use more money in their campaign, and some of their influential leaders also even come out and compete in the elections, right? So they had much more expectations in this election than 2010 and 2015 elections. So if we look back to previous general elections in 2010, ethnic parties cover 16% of states and region plutos. And in 2015, one NLD was fully back to the political arena, and ethnic parties coverage reduced from 16% to 13%, while NLD obtained 75% in states and region level. So that is actually calculated on the combined parliamentary seats and the ethnicity representatives. So if we segregate it between states and regions, we can say that ethnic parties did much better, like covering in 2016, covering 32% in states and only 1% in regions, while NLD cover 45% in states and 94% in regions. So that was in 2015. So now in this general election 2020, ethnic parties won actually only 12% on overall states and region parliament seats, while NLD gained about 82% and USDP made much reduced, only about like 6%. So if we specifically look at two states, ethnic parties cover 33%. That is only only 1% increase over 2015 results. And more like, unfortunately, for ethnic parties, they made only 0.24% in region. That is only one ethnic, actually independent candidate who represents Rakhine ethnic group in Yangon region parliaments won. So NLD cover 51% in this election. So NLD obtained like 6% more seats in state parliaments, particularly in Chin and Karen states. NLD won more. And USDP lost a lot of seats in both states and region parliaments, more in regional parliaments. So USDP gave up a lot of seats to NLD and few seats to ethnic parties. And fortunately for ethnic parties, they gained a lot less seats than they expected, particularly in Chin and Kachin state. So one of the interesting reality is that states are still serve as a contesting arena for the two major parties, NLD and the USDP, right? In regions, NLD won almost all, and USDP just gained only 4 seats, in like 2 seats in Yangon and 2 in Sakhain region. But in states, USDP still maintained some portions. And more interestingly, these areas located, like the USDP won, the area where the USDP won, located in more like conflict zones and border areas where the Tembador, like the government armed forces or the border guard forces, which are under the supervision of the Tembador station. So NLD also won landslides in some ethnic states like Chin and Karen, where NLD built strong like bedrocks in terms of having strong local leaders in her side, in NLD side. Like in Chin state, like NLD is supported by local leaders like Vice President Van Thieu and Dr. Sassar, and in Karen state, the state party leader, the chief minister, the lady, the Nankin Twimian, she's so strong. So where NLD gained strong support from influential local leaders, ethnic parties' effort seems in vain. So in terms of state pluto, like a stretcher, state parliament stretcher, NLD will become like majority in all regional parliaments. And in states like Chin, Karen, Mon, and Kachin, NLD will hold majority. But in Shan, if we look only at the elected seats, and if we combine all ethnic parties, we can say ethnic parties gain most of the seats, But inter-ethnic politics in Shan state also contributed to divisiveness among ethnic parties, right? So in that case, we can see more weight at the side of USDP which will definitely have support from the military MPs, right? So we need to see how NLD will play in this game setting, and it will really depend on NLD and major ethnic parties, like SNLD, and also the PNO, the Old National Organization, which usually has a tendency to form alliance with major parties, either NLD or USDP. So previously, PNO, the Old National Organization, allied more with USDP, but they had some conflicts in a pre-election period. So we cannot really say that the alliance preference of PNO at this point. And Kenya is also interesting, but NLD won more elected seats than USDP and ethnic party combined. So Rakhine is the only outstanding case where Rakhine parties won majority in the state's parliament, though they are not able to cover 75%. So in Mon, NLD will also have a good opposition in Mon state parliament. The MUP will become a very good opposition for NLD. So this is the only states that we have seen such kind of interesting NLD ethnic party opposition, and then that kind of a playing environment. So okay, this is my take on for this states and region level more source of results. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sam. So Nick, I'll turn to you and see what your thoughts are. It's as an outsider observing the election.
Thanks, Jonathan. I don't have too much to add in addition to what my colleagues have already said as far as the results. I wanted to just dwell a little bit on the USDP, which I think surprised itself in how poorly it has performed in this last election. I think it expected to do better, and has. So I think, one of the major sort of results in the last couple of days, in the last weeks, has been this dispute over the result, which, in a sense, I think it kind of amounts to not a lot. When the USDP, so after the election, the USDP lost 8 seats from 2015, 33 down from 41. In the days after the election, as this became clear, it started to make a big fuss about fraud and the illegitimacy of the election, and held a press conference where it claimed that there had been widespread fraud and that the election needed to be rerun with the supervision of the Tamador. And initially that seemed kind of a bit mortifying because of, obviously the long history of the involvement of the Tamador in electoral politics it's not a comforting one, but it sort of quickly became clear that the USDP hadn't pre-cleared this with the Tamador, and that there was no support. The Tamador basically left the USDP flapping in the wind, and assuming that there literally was no prior discussion, that seems like a very plausible reaction to that, because it did also put the Tamador in a really awkward position to sort of attempt to kind of bring it in this way. Subsequently, the USDP has been using the kind of the sort of formal mechanisms for disputing the election result to do just that. It's submitted hundreds and hundreds of complaints to the UEC and local police, I think, as well. But it looks like these are really going to amount to nothing. Partly because, I think that it's fairly clear that aside from these questions about cancellation and disenfranchisement of voters, and the sort of other questions about how the UEC, the Union Election Commission, has conducted itself, that the polling was basically free of the kind of fraud that the USDP is alleging. It's disgraced itself. It's really just it's such an embarrassing performance. In the days afterwards, it also kind of went after both teachers and persons with disabilities, kind of implying that they had somehow been involved in this attempt to deprive them of power, and then sort of immediately walked those claims back and apologized for them in a sort of really disorganized fashion. So anyway, basically, it seems like the sort of outcome of this is not a lot, but what it does sort of suggest is, one, that the USDP is sort of fading, and I think surprised even itself in how poorly it's performed, and also that the notion of the kind of proximity between the USDP and the Tatmadaw is perhaps not as close as people were previously assuming. I mean, it sort of looks like both a lack of kind of direct coordination between the two and an unwillingness on the part of the Tatmadaw to stick its neck out and sort of back this apparently fairly unpopular party. Does that mean that the USDP is going to disappear from the political scene? I personally do not think so. And the main reason, I mean, I think the main sort of reason for that, I mean, for one thing, it does have a base of supporters, that's clear. But I think it also has these quite significant financial resources that were transferred to it under the period of the dictatorship, and also under the Thein Sein period, before, when it was the Union Solidarity and Development Association, which was not a sort of direct, it wasn't a party political body. It was provided lots of assets, to assist its mobilization, and it still has those, which are a considerable resource for mobilizing, for campaigning in the future. And that's it. I'll limit my remarks to that. Thanks, Jonathan.
Okay. Thanks, Nick. So Maitri, let's turn to you and get your thoughts, your perspectives as a historian, either in response to the election results and what the other speakers have said, but then also, I guess, to open up, this thinking about sort of the controversies that were apparent and what I think Nick has alluded to.
Thanks very much, Jonathan, and thanks very much to the ANU Myanmar Research Centre for inviting me to join this panel. I was actually very impressed overall by the fact that the elections actually even occurred during such a crazy period of COVID and so forth. It's not easy to manage these types of events anywhere in the world, as we all know from other parts, other elections that were held. And so for me, it was quite remarkable that the institutions and the processes, the mechanisms that were established, through the controversial Constitution of 2008, and more broadly, the Roadmap to Democracy that was also very controversially enacted in the early 2000s. But we have to remember that this process is still connected to these earlier initiatives. And so, to me, the fact that this election was occurred, that they have a body that they can send complaints to, that there is some sort of process is important, I think, for the country moving forward, irrespective of the actual results at the moment. So that's how I was looking at it from a sort of broad perspective. I was also interested, I already saw some of the questions from the audience that have asked, what do we think about the overwhelming results of the NLD and so forth. And I was thinking about it. What struck me is the strength of the current government and the NLD's messaging and their coordination for them to pull this off. So for one thing, that hopefully will bode well when they are trying to convey similar types of messages, when they're trying to build support for their future, economic recovery and reform program, for instance, or other types of initiatives that are going to be needing to be focused on following the elections, in order to deal not only with COVID, but also, of course, the long list of issues that are facing the country in terms of capacity building, infrastructure, and so forth. Will this type of campaign, will it provide them with the skills and the experience to be able to muster similar types of support for the government's initiatives and policies? I also was struck, by the importance, as commentators have already suggested, by the importance of Daw Aung San Suu Kyi as a key figure in in the NLD and her importance in drawing the type of support. ANU's alum Nini Jal has written about 3 different types of reasons or 3 different types of supporters of the NLD, and I think it's important for us to look at his ideas, which suggest that there are very different reasons, 3 different groups more or less that that support the NLD for various reasons, and I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future in terms of succession, whether this type of support can be continued throughout the country. I know I'm jumping a little ahead, Jonathan. Sorry about that. I also was interested in, and I'm very glad that Nick brought up the results of the USDP, because it is worrying to me in some ways. If you take seriously, as I do, Nakanishi's argument about the role of the civilian government in relationship to the previous military government. If we are to take his argument seriously, that in a sense, civilian government allows a transition from leaders in the military to transition into the civilian government, sort of relieving the pressure at the top as officers go up the ladder. If that starts not to work, I worry about the bottleneck with officers on the military side. And we can come back to that issue in our third part of this session. But I hope that the transition can still continue to work so that there are other ways in which folks can participate in government other than through just through the military. So it's funny that the USDP didn't do very well, but I'm also kind of worried about that in some ways. We can come back to that. But overall, the importance of the process, as I said, is I think important, and especially if we look at it historically. I mean, there are various ways we can look at this at these elections through the context of a democratic transition or move towards liberal democratic institutions and processes. There's obviously very different ideas about what democracy means, whether it's the roadmap to democracy the Army put together, or the NLDs, or the international communities. And so these elections can be interpreted within any of these 3 contexts. I think we should also be thinking about these elections and the fact that power, there is participation happening at the level of the citizens in a way that perhaps we haven't seen in a while. Although there is a long history of this in terms of elections occurring in early periods of the 20th century, whether it's during the time of the colonial period when they were voting for representatives to the Indian Parliament or the Burmese legislature, or during the 50s. This is part of this broader history of political parties, of political action, and it'd be interesting to sort of see this in that broader context, how things are developing as we shift to a more liberal democratic frame of governance, and how these elections are successful or not in producing the types of transitions that were part of the 2010 liberalization process. And finally, I think while we are focused on Myanmar, I think we also have to think about these elections in terms of the broader processes of integration that we can see either at the local level, the national level, or the regional level, whether we are dealing with, I mean, for instance, when people are voting overwhelming for the NLD, are they voting in a way that is then affirming this sense of Myanmar? Or is it a vote that perhaps affirms a particular notion of community at the local level? And how will this then also translate to other types of notions of community that are actually a part of this whole geopolitical context? The formation of ASEAN, the recent RCEP agreements, the role of transnational assemblages that are being formed now. How will this election actually connect with these types of processes, these formations of SEZs and these other transnational corridors, for instance? Will these elections just be about Myanmar in a sense, or is it also going to be about these types of dynamics that are occurring at a broader regional Asian level? I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Maitri. So you raise a number of potential issues observers can identify in the course of the election, and then a number of potential issues that outsiders, foreigners should consider in relation to what the meaning of the elections are for not just for the country, but also for the rest of the region. I want to continue on this theme about the controversies that sort of played out and some of the issues that occurred in the course of the campaigning. And I know that there was so Nick had alluded to the fact that there was these allegations about voter suppression, disenfranchisement of potential electors or voters. But then again, there's also lingering issues that have been continuing on in this election cycle from the last election cycle, and so in particular, ethnic conflict, ethnic tensions, the situation in Rakhine State with the Rohingya community, Buddhist nationalism, and then I think most observers have noted that within the past couple of years, there have been escalating issues regarding land and mining, and then lack of resolution regarding corruption and those problems with respect to development and investment. So I want to delve deeper into those. And so I want to turn again to our Burmese speakers. So I'll begin with Mamyat Thepitsa talking about some of the issues that I think she is concerned with, and then we'll turn to Masuman Thong. So Mamyat Thepitsa, what are your thoughts?
Let me in this round, let me cover some of the controversy issues more relating to the minorities, especially the most marginalized ones. But I actually really give credit to some of these, measures, elections, procedural measures that UEC actually successfully managed. This is the first time the UEC had a chance to observe, the military, votes, So previously we didn't have that chance. So now all of these voting station of the military voting stations became the UEC observe, voting stations. So this is one thing that we can give credit. This is a big change, but we still have that kind of and fair election management and procedures. I also at the same time appreciate NLD have two Muslim candidates, and they both won, one in Mandalay and one in Yangon. But sadly, we have learned that some Muslim candidates were rejected by UEC even only after they were recognized as candidates. So as far as MRF learned, we have seen two candidates who got rejected by UEC even after they obtained their registration as candidates. So one candidate represents DPNS, the Democratic Party of New Society, Lubautit Party, Democracy Party, and which is a well-known party for its strong standing with human rights and rights for the marginalized group. And another candidate, represents Democracy and Human Rights Party, DHRP. So according to some anecdotal evidences, DHRP is known as the party standing for Rohingya. So there may be much more incidences like this, but these two cases were mostly reviewed by both international and local media like RFA and 7 Days and DMG, So in these cases, UEC revoked, the register status of candidates in second week of October, when these candidates were already on their way of campaigning. Their names were already printed on the ballot sheets, and UEC crossed out their name on the ballots. So the official reason given by UEC, according to the new coverage in both international and local media, is that the parents of these candidates have not become yet the citizens of Myanmar, when they still just held the three-folded national ID cards when these candidates before that these candidates were born. So actually, this reason is very baseless because every citizen of Myanmar, Burma, actually used to have only like a 3-folded registration cards, and they all received the NRC cards, the national registration cards, the pink cards that we are now holding. Like only one. The 1990s elections were about to convene, and then the governments have that kind of like nationwide program to issue these NRC cards. So my parents had the same experience. Before I was born, they just hold that 3-folded national ID cards. So according to the news, media, the coverage, the parents of these candidates have 3-folded cards, and they work actually for the government as the public servants. So the father of one of the candidates used to work as a police chief of the Maundo, that is the one of the township in Rakhine State. So Maundo, like he served as a police chief of that police station, the township police station, and he became a retired pensioner in 1972 and still working for the Justice Affairs Committees of the town. So this is the candidate sides. And the media also reveal some voters, some groups who lost their voting rights mainly because of their identities. So identities of these people or their parents, appear as Muslims or Bengali, either on their NRC cards or in their household registrations, were denied to cast their votes. And some of them were never listed on the voting list. So even though most of them voted in 2015 elections. So the most well-known cases was covered by RFA on the case of over 1,000 people in Papon township that was in Karen State. So the same reasons, the 3-folded ID cards and also mixed blood, like Muslim identity, seems the main reasons given by the local UEC officials and denying those people to vote. So sadly speaking, like in addition to thousands and thousands of Rohingyas whose their citizen rights are still being denied, we also have many, many more people, both candidates and individual people, whose civic rights are still being denied even in this democratic era. This is disgraceful. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. So next I will turn to Masu and ask for your perspectives about some of the controversies that were in the election.
I think the preliminary reports of the election day are quite positive. This is the report about the election day. Saya Maitri actually reminds me to appreciate the efforts of the Union Election Commission. They were able to hold the elections successfully and peacefully under such criticism and pressure. So that was remarkable. But there are definitely a lot of problems in the operations itself. So like there are many inconsistencies. So for one polling station doing this, but another polling station is not doing this. So there is an inconsistency, a lot happening in many areas. So for example, like if the polling officers are given the forms for counting, like a tally form for counting, what they have to do is they have to use the tally form to count the votes. But instead of they are using the form that UEC organized to use, they just count the votes, and then they after they voted, they put on the tally form, etc. There are a lot of operational weaknesses in the management, but because Siamanyata mentioned about the minority and etc. I think this is worth mentioning that polling stations are also not in the neutral locations, meaning that they are actually precise in the Buddhist religious premises. If people wants to vote, have to vote, and then they have to take off their shoes because this is the religious premises, and that is not comfortable for everyone, especially for the religious minority who are not supposed to take off their shoes to vote. So this kind of thing we have spotted a lot. But I think these weaknesses and the inconsistencies are not intentional. It's the more like operational issues, technical issues. So with good recommendations, I think it can be improved. But what problematic is the decision making of the Union Election Commission. So when they make the when they cancel the voting in some area, the decision making is not clear. And when they make the changes to the bylaw, the relevant stakeholders are not consulted or properly informed in a timely manner. These are really problematic. Actually, this undermines the credibility of the electoral process, the transparency of the electoral process. When we talk about the restriction on the campaign speeches, people focus on how UEC censor the campaign messages of the political parties. But we're not aware that people, especially the parties, the contestants, how much they don't trust in the process. So when we interview these parties and they mention that, it is only 15-minute airtime, and UEC will censor our messages, and we will not be able to present our policy anyway. So why would we bother? So we can see two. One is like obvious censorship of the UEC. One is that do not trust in the process, that political parties do not want to engage in the process. So we also have to be aware of this kind of distrust in the issues and the electoral process. And then if we want to talk about the fairness, of course, we also have the problems due to the institutional limitation. For example, like the designation of constituency based on the geographical and not based on the population. So it actually creates the different requirements for each competitor. So for example, like one party require like 2 months campaign period is enough for one party, but for others 2 months is not enough. For some party, 10 million campaign finance is enough, but other party 10 million is not enough. But these are never properly discussed, and UEC is not really engaging with the political parties to have the agreement or to increase the trust in the process. Also, the appointment of the Union Election Commission as well. People talk about the appointment is because of the ruling party appoints the UEC. That's why UEC is loyal to the ruling government, and people only talk about that. But I think it is not about it is about the appointment, and also because this appointment of the UEC has been criticized since the day one. So it has been the same for each Union Election Commission. But why this Union Election Commission has more complaints from many attacks? Why it received complaints from voter, and why it received more complaints from the party than in the past, than the last one. So I think when we talk about the appointment of the UEC, we should talk about not only the appointment, but also this leadership of the UEC actually hold the political views, meaning that they hold their own political views, they act on that. So they are not like, they are going like beyond their mandate. So for example, in the recent interview with the UEC chairman, he said he actually shared a very interesting analysis. He said in previous election, only 22 parties won. Now in this election, only 90 parties won. There are 60 or 70 parties who never got public support. And he implies that you do not get support, you do not want the seat because you never got the public support. So instead of you blaming on the electoral process, why don't you try to get the support from the public? So he has this kind of opinion. I think it is beyond the mandate of the Union Election Commission. So I think the real problem here is not only the appointment, but also these are civil servants who hold their political views and making the decision based on their political views.
Yeah, thank you, Sayama. So we have a lot of questions. So I think I want to give the panelists an opportunity to respond to the questions. So to do this in an organized fashion, I'll turn to Nick Cheeseman to convey some of the questions that came through. And then what I'll do is that I'll ask the panelists to unmute their microphone, and then they can take turns addressing the questions that they feel relevant for their expertise. Right. So thank you. So Nick Cheeseman.
Thanks, Jonathan. So to get us started, I'm going to take the question from Nicholas Coppell that came in, I think, partly in response to Nick Ross's comments about the Tatmadaw. And Nicholas Coppell says that unlike the USDP, the Tatmadaw seems to have accepted the election outcome. Is this a sign that the Tatmadaw is accepting the evidence that civilians can manage the country? And if so, is the Tatmadaw likely now to contemplate constitutional change? Nick, maybe we can start with you, and then if any of the other panelists want to weigh in, they can do so.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks, Nick. I don't want to get too speculative here, because I think that is, I mean, one thing that's very clear about this issue of the dispute is that we are all basically in a position of speculating. And so we can kind of read these things for what they may or may not indicate, but we simply don't know. I mean, my gut instinct is that is probably overly optimistic as a prognosis. I think maybe an equally plausible reading of the sort of facts is that the Tatmadaws realized that their veto power is sufficient, and that the NLD is not a sufficient threat, that they really need the USDP on side to guarantee that their interests are represented. I think that's more where I incline as a reading of those facts. But I'll throw the floor open to anybody else that would like to disagree.
Yeah, I think I would, if I might, Jonathan and Nick. I would agree with Nick on that as well. I think it's in the Tatmadaw's interest to accept the results. This is their system they set up. It's a system that's important to them. They have, as Nick suggested already, their representation in the parliament. So they want to see the process and the institutions hold strong. The results are probably less important. And let's not forget that there are differences and factionalism amongst USDP members and military folks, just as there are factions and so forth amongst the NLD. So we have to keep these things in mind, but I would have to support that. Yeah, I think he's absolutely right. I'm not sure it's going to, I don't think that is a reflection though of an inclination for constitutional change. I think it may actually represent just the opposite, that they want to keep this in place.
Okay, if none of the other panelists have anything else to say on that question, there are quite a number of questions around the NLD's position and the outcome as it relates to the NLD in the next 5 years. So let me just pick up on a couple of those initially and then perhaps go to another topic and come back again. We have a question from Victor Wei asking, in general terms, are you yourselves surprised by how well the NLD performed in the election, and especially in the ethnic regions, and what we can expect from the NLD in the next few years? We also have a question from an anonymous attendee who says that as Aung San Suu Kyi and NLD won the landslide victory in this election, they earned another opportunity to govern from the upper hand. Will there be any discussions on finding a potential successor of Aung San Suu Kyi in the next administration? So in short, what are some of the things you're expecting in the next 5 years? And especially this question of succession, is it really going to come into play in this next period of government?
This coming 5 years will be critical years for NLD, this is quite sure, But despite the landslide victory of NLD in this election, actually NLD needs to realize the issue of legitimacy, so which sometimes we can really be decided simply by looking at the number of seats won, but also need to look at number of actual votes obtained by each party, So in several areas, when we look at in this election, NLD won in a very tight situation in several areas. Like sometimes it's the tight competition from the USDP. Sometimes the tight situation from the ethnic parties. So, and also this time the voter turnout is higher because more ethnic people came out and vote than previous two elections. So the hope of ethnic people to have their rights and their expectations, towards a genuine federal democracy is very high. So NLD's statement for inviting ethnic parties, to collaborate, that was actually issued even before the vote count done, by NLD. The NLD, show is willingness to welcome ethnic parties and the ethnic people. So ethnic people and ethnic parties also show their appreciation, but most of them have some suspects. So NLDs definitely can have a good strategies. So NLD can provide more autonomy through its elected party members across different states, and some will become the cabinet members and some will become members of parliament. So NLD can effectively practice decentralization strategy and approaches through these NLD representatives. And definitely we also already learned through several research, including MREF, second round of the study of the performance on the states and region parliaments, shows that the role of subnational parliaments in contributing toward decentralization and creating outcomes of democratization, among the local populations have been improving. So due to efforts of states and region, parliaments, new municipal laws were promulgated, resulting more democratic municipal committees in different administrative level, from states and region level to township level. So these things are happening right now. So we have seen more local development planning and implementations in several states and regions. So these things, a lot of people in the top leadership level haven't never noticed enough. So NLD should invest more in strengthening and also providing more autonomy to states and region governments, and need to pay attention to address some barriers that prevent effective legislative process in subnational level. So for instance, we need to remove some outdated laws and practice by the outdated laws that are still being practiced by union level ministries in areas, which are already listed in a subnational legislative list, things like that. So NLD actually need to be more, more strategic, and also need to be more realistic, and need to also apply this existing the resources that are already gained in his elected among elected members. So this is one thing. I will also cover two or more things that NLD also should do in coming 5 years.
Nick, in regard to succession, just very quickly, I think it's absolutely important that the NLD and any other political party and the government itself have forward planning and succession plans in place, because that will enable their agendas to go beyond just the individuals. And that's always been a question, of course, with Suu Kyi and her party. And the composition, for instance, of the party's central committee has also been sometimes an indicator of whether there's inclusion or not of multiple generations of voices that have become part of have been under the NLD flag. So it'll be important for the NLD to demonstrate this, and not only within the way the party operates, but how the government operates in terms of forward planning and succession.
Yeah, so there's a number of specific questions also around appointments in this regard, and this is a follow-up on the previous question regarding NLD policies and practices, and then maybe we can turn to some other issues that are coming up in the Q&A. And so Charlotte Galloway asks, do we expect to see many changes in presidential ministerial positions? And then also Akim Muntz, apologies if I've pronounced your name incorrectly, asks, with regards to picking of chief ministers, do you think that the NLD will give regional and state parliaments opportunities to suggest candidates, or will they appoint their favourites? And the question especially applies to Shan and Rakhine states, but also other states like Gaya State, where previously there have been issues. And relatedly, Hunter Marston asks or comments that Zo Myint Maung, vice chair of the NLD, held a press conference yesterday pledging to approach ethnic affairs with a broader perspective. Do you expect the NLD to allow ethnic parties to select their own chief ministers or not?
Can I, Nick? Oh, okay. So that chief ministers questions. So we have this bitter moments in after 2015 elections, so ethnic states like Rakhine states and also Shan state, they really expect to have a better chance to nominate their chief minister from the elected representative, the Lutos, but they didn't get that chance, and they actually received a bitter result, because NLD actually approached not to the parties in selecting the chief minister, but also to the specific candidates that NLD leaders believe that specific candidates will be much more willingness to ally with the NLD. So that the candidates that the elected MPs and also the party, they have a breakup. They break up each other. They didn't they cannot work anymore after that NLD selections. So this is the bitter history. But now we have a lot of a lesson learned. People also say that NLD already received a lot of lesson learned. But again, this time again, we have only two states, Shan and Rakhine, where NLD have a majority and NLD have this chance, So we will have to see, what NLD will do in these states and region. But I think this, we actually expect NLD's because of some of these initial steps NLD made after the election, welcoming the ethnic parties and things like that. So I put my more positive hopes towards NLD's decision, and also giving chance more to the ethnic parties and also ethnic representatives in these states, Lutos, to choose to nominate the chief ministers. And also maybe later on, NLD, in a longer term, within that 5 years, NLD really need to accept that idea of selecting the chief minister from the states and region parliaments, because one, NLD put its effort to change the constitution. The USDP and other ethnic parties actually agree that options like choosing the chief minister from the parliaments and then try to change the constitutions in that way, but NLD disagree, and that this is the NLD the idea. Yeah. So thank you.
We have a couple of questions that relate to the part of other parties in the electoral process, and I know maybe Nick or Sumanta, you'd like to weigh in on these. One from Thetzo Twe is that what could be the explanation of 0% success for increasingly popular but very newly formed political parties such as UBP, PP and PPP? And relatedly, Paul Taylor asks, as a follow-up question to that one, what role does the panel think that these new parties played in the defeat of the USDP? In other words, drawing away votes and attention from the USDP, even though they themselves were not successful in picking up seats.
I think that's why in the beginning, that's why I decided to discuss a little bit about the electoral system. I think that is the main culprit about why these new parties like UBP and PP and these PPP cannot win in the election, because we use FPTP system that actually encourages the two-party competition. So mainly two groups actually compete. So every parties in that level do not get chances. So in Myanmar, we actually think NLD and USDP are the two main contenders. But the problem is these are not two main contestants. So FPTP system, we have two-party competition, but NLD and USDP are not the main competitor. Actually, the competitor is the 25% Tamador and the NLD. So USDP is in third place, and PPP, PP, and UPP actually in fourth place. So it's even harder for them to get any chances. That's one reason. I think that is the main reason. But of course, there are other reasons that the constituency they choose to compete also have a lot of population. So they have to organize this area, and that kind of reasons also involved. And actually, in this election, they cannot do any proper campaigns. Some people with the financial resources, they actually rely on online campaign, but we also have problems with the online campaign. So like we cannot boost the polls, we cannot pay, and this messages are censored, that kind of thing. So not everybody's 100% relying on online as well. So there are a lot of reasons, but I think I want to focus and I want to highlight the main problem is the electoral system and the military percentage.
Yeah, I also wanted to pick up on the political system issue in the future, because I think it brings in those questions about succession and the future of the MLD and the USDP as well as just a whole series of other questions. As I guess most people may know, the system in Myanmar is just unbelievably majoritarian, with the first past the post electoral districts, but also the system that Suman was alluding to before, where the party that's in a position in the combined sitting of the national parliaments to elect the president is then able to appoint almost all positions of significance within the bureaucracy and also at the states and regions in terms of the chief ministers. So it's the disparity there is enormous. I mean, even an overwhelmingly popular party like the NLD is having its popularity or its power exaggerated far beyond its popularity by that system, which is bad. And we've all seen the negative effects of that in terms of overriding the popularity of ethnic parties in the states. But it would be even worse, I think, if the NLD were to fade from power. I think in a way, this position of the NLD as the overwhelmingly popular supermajority party allows that system to appear to be more legitimate than I think it otherwise would be. I noted recently that a spokesperson for the Tatmadaw had made a reference to the ongoing political crisis in terms of the electoral system and suggesting that a proportional representation system would be the answer. And that is partly a possible reference to the lack of representation the USDP is achieving in comparison to its share of votes. But it may also be a reference to the fact that in such a system, if parties were, because under proportional representation, you have big districts, multi-member districts, and parties receive seats in proportion to their share of the vote, rather than just having 51 in a district and winning. That the share of in a system where parties were winning a plurality of votes, like in the sort of 20-30% in between multiple parties with this same constitution, it would become immediately incredibly dysfunctional. It would become illegitimate, I think, because it would be clear that one party with a minority of the vote was receiving an enormous amount of power. But under that system, it would presumably be the case that the Tatmadaw was a kingmaker. So it would probably be in a position to throw its weight behind any party that was receiving either a plurality or not of the vote and make it the party of government. That's all I'll say for too long.
Thanks, Nick. We have a question from the floor from Jomin San.
Hello, Mingalava. My question is whether the 2020 election is really free and fair, even including 2015, because there is also the constitution structure. Military take 25%, So all the parties also competing in within the 75%. So what is your view, on this kind of the constitutional system, this kind of the election doing? Thank you.
I think I will answer very shortly. First is we observers do not use the term free and fair elections anymore. So we don't assess the elections whether they are free and fair because the term itself is very controversial. So instead we use whether these elections are credible or the transparent or inclusive or democratic. That gave us the breakdown, right? Whether these elections are democratic, we can look at these how the electoral process is managed and how they operate, etc. So for these elections, it's hard to tell because we have to look at two separate things. Election day is different thing, and then the whole management regarding the electoral process is another thing. And also we also need to consider about the COVID impact in the election as well. So it is so hard. It is hard for us, or maybe not comprehensive for us to just say that this election is free and fair. Instead, we better do which is not democratic, like 25% in the military, which is not credible. The acceptance of the result and the decision making, etc. We should better break down like that.
There were, just to add to those comments, it's in most districts. I mean, there is a small minority of districts where there are some questions and appearances of funny business, but in the majority of districts, the actual process of casting votes seems to have been free from interference. But as Simon was just referencing, it's really questions more about the sort of broader environment where those issues come into play about fair competition.
Shagun Gupta asks, or comments first of all, that external observers often express dissatisfaction with democratization in Myanmar. However, electoral politics have thrived in the country since 2015. How do we frame the progress that has been made, keeping in mind existing challenges in the country? Is it still a transition? How has the meaning of the word transition itself changed over time? Maitri, I think this does go to one or two of your own opening comments, so perhaps you could pick up on that, and then if other colleagues have general reflections on whether or not to talk of this election as still part of a transitional process or as something else would be great.
Yeah, it's a terrific question, and it's worth thinking about. I think we could look at it within the context of 1988, and the end of the BSPP, and this transition into a more liberal democratic form of governance, and therefore we could, perhaps look at these elections as being a more or less successful continuation of the foundations that have been in place. And of course, not everybody agrees with the system that's in place, but I think it's probably a better step than direct military rule. You have a hybrid form of governance, and it's not perfect, but it is pushing forward certain ideals that hopefully will be able to develop, as someone was talking about earlier, a sense of trust between the electorate and government in the system itself. I also think that, we also have to think about the broader context of civil war that we are in, and probably you could look at it as a period of transition or a period of reconstruction, in a sense, like after civil war. Although you could say by the fighting and the edges of the country and the peripheral borderland zones that the civil war hasn't ended yet, and that's precisely the reason why elections couldn't be held in those parts of the country. So it is very much that's part of that broader context. I'd also like to again revisit this very idea that the nation is still defining itself. They had a period of time when they were experimenting with colonial foundations that was inherited after World War II. They shifted to a much more central command unitary state with the BSPP. That transitioned, and in between period, you might say, was the direct military rule. And now we are again going into a sort of hybrid civilian military government again, but this time with hints of liberal democratic institutions and processes in place. And I will just add to that what's interesting is one wonders if the recent election actually is a hint about a move towards another one-party system, given the extraordinary results that the NLD have, and whether or not that is something that feels more comfortable, feels more familiar to the electorate. And of course, depends on who you ask. But I think it's a terrific question to be thinking much more broadly, and as the person from the audience has raised.
I'll have to interrupt there since we're reaching near the end of the session. What I would like to do is to allow each of the panelists time to render closing comments. So I think, the nature of the questions naturally turn to some considerations about the future of Myanmar, particularly with the near future. But for each of the panelists, what I'll ask is a personal reflection about the consequences of the election for Myanmar's future beyond this month or next month, but much more long term. So I'll begin with Masu Mantham and Sama. Closing comments, 2 minutes each, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the direction of the country will be entirely up to the NLD because NLD won landslide. And also no one has really power or the position to push for the competing agenda. But to me, from what I understand is the NLD's attitude seems remain the same, meaning that I don't see many signals that they will change or they will amend the Article 261 in the near future, meaning to allow the subnational parliament to choose their chief minister or to reappoint the Union Election Commission or to go for the electoral assistance change from FPTP to PR. I'm saying this because the NLD has this worry that there is a Tamil 25% in the military. So we need to win landslide. And also Tamil will never leave the parliament as long as NLD win landslide. So it's like NLD move is based on the this calculation. So it's instead of seeing the changes and NLD worries, waiting for the right timing, and then is reinforcing the Tamil's way of democracy accidentally, because this will lead only to centralization. And if there is no changes in the future, even if there is a discussion among the ethnic political elites and the other political elites to share power, I don't think it's a good procedure. I'm saying this because I think it's worth mentioning that there is a difference in the word. NLD mentioned Democratic Federal Union and ethnic forces want Federal Democratic Union. The difference is based in the concept. NLD thinks without democracy, federalism is dangerous. So which is the opposite idea of ethnic elite. So I think it will take time. And then I think the whole system should change. We should amend because NLD also, of course, not in public. They also thinking that USDP is now having its own medicine. So they are testing its own medicine. Whenever someone appoint the weaknesses in the system, NLD response is like USDP is having its own medicine. This is the constitution. They drafted this, the electoral law, they frame it, and we are just implementing it. So without realizing it, NLD is implementing the Tamil's way of democracy. That is worrying. So I think we should all push for the change. We should break the cycle. Why don't we have discussions among political groups and make necessary amendments and institutional building that would guarantee the equality of the society? Because now USDP is having its own medicine. We don't know would NLD will be having its own medicine as well, or other group. So why don't the NLD take the lead and take the credit and amend this when it is possible, when they have the capacity?
Thank you, Sama. So Mamyat Davidsa would like to have closing comments from you.
Yes, so we have this a lot of like some worry concerns, at this one side is, we're going back to the one party dictatorship, or the other side also have concerns like we're going to have the ethnocentric, politics will be heightened in these years, so because like some of these areas that ethnic parties want like more seats is the area like where we have the intense conflict, war, and also the conflict affected area, and some areas where the ethnic armed groups have a strongholds. So that kind of like ethnocentric, politics is also one thing that NLD and also all of these stakeholders need to worry, and so NLD definitely need to have a good strategy. Like I said, one method NLD can use to reconcile these interests and benefits, rights of these ethnic groups is like giving more autonomy to its own elective members that will become in some of the cabinet members, some will become the parliamentarian, and the second method is, that everyone expected NLD need to form the national reconciliation government, like by providing some important cabinet positions to major ethnic parties, that kind of thing. So this is actually this one is not a new idea, but the third way NLD can use, and then that NLD like can shape, more inclusive federal state building by including some ethnic groups which doesn't have party representation nor representation in like an imperial dialogue, nor elected representations like the Nu, Shani, Lisu, many other groups, that don't really have like all of these representations. They are still being excluded, in a federal state building. So NLD need to make two separate dialogue. One is the existing and like a NCA-based dialogue where actors of all sides, like Tamaro and all other actors, play more role. And another dialogue platform should be like NLD should be formed is the federal state building platform, which is more inclusive and more civic actors and like actors of like representative democracy play more role in that play more role in that platform. So why these two like platforms will like should be like working hand in hand, the final policy decision making more in the hands of the actors of the second platform. So this is, I think the NLD should think about is in this 5-year terms.
Okay, thank you, Sayama. So Nick, do you have, I'd like to hear your closing comments.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks everybody for bearing with us, just a few more minutes. So some of the questions we didn't get around to touch on the peace process and the future of the peace process. It's very clear that the negotiations haven't progressed in the NLD's first term anything like as fast as many people hoped and promised as well. And I think the reason for that is that the conflict is central to the political economy that's taking shape in Myanmar. And the incumbent power holders, including the NLD, have shown they can live quite comfortably with the conflict that is now, and in many cases would be threatened by a major change in that environment. And so I think a very slow-moving negotiation process or peace process that kind of allows the pretext that peace is something that everyone's working towards, but never really gets there, suits everybody's interest. But I just wanted to briefly recount an incident that I think illustrates the flaw in that logic, even from a kind of brutal real politics standpoint that these parties are seemingly operating from. So in April of this year, Jason Wimol, a World Health Organization driver, was killed in Rakhine State while driving a UN-marked vehicle carrying COVID-19 samples to Yangon to be tested. And at the time, none of the groups acknowledged responsibility for the attack, and it seems like it might have been an accident. And it wasn't obvious at the time, but I think that event is perhaps the single biggest predictor of what was coming down the pike in the remainder of the year. Because, in case people aren't aware, the outbreak that is tearing through the country right now and has cost already thousands of lives got its foothold in Rakhine State. The country was actually able to get the first outbreak, the first cases under control, but the hollowing out of local government and the conflict and insecurity in Rakhine State, as well as the restriction on the operation of humanitarian organizations, meant that the virus could sneak back in from where it spread to the rest of the country. And so I think what this shows in the enormous devastation that the outbreak has caused to the broader economy far outside of Rakhine State is that even though the conflict has been lived with for 70 years now, it's a gaping wound that makes the country so much more vulnerable than it would otherwise be. That's my closing thought.
Thank you for that. Maitri, I'll let you have the closing comments.
Okay, thank you. Just 3 points very quickly. Now that the NLD has the mandate to take the country forward, it'd be interesting to see what they do with it. That's going to be, it's easy to blame the Constitution and 1/4 of the Parliament on the military. How that translates to better jobs, better healthcare, roads, transport, education, and so forth, that's going to be a challenge for the NLD because they'll be the incumbents now for two electoral cycles now. They may not be in the same position for the voting populace to have be patient with them. So how they are able to translate to these everyday needs, I think, is going to be a priority for the NLD government, or any government for that matter, that is elected into Naypyidaw. The second aspect is what I said when I started off, that I think is still very important that this process is in place, because it's enabling people to express their political views and political action through the ballot rather than bullets, which has often been the history of modern Myanmar with civil war and so forth. And finally, I wonder at the same time about this process, because while elections provide that chance for people to bring their voice to it, often these voices are very much in conflict, and we often use campaigns to show why we are distinctive, why you should vote for us rather than somebody else. And you don't have the language of consensus very much involved in these types of election campaigns. How the NLD or who else is in a power sharing role are able to build on a language of consensus in order to push forward this peace process, as Nick brought up, is going to be a challenge for the NLD going forward. Could the language of economic development and so forth be what transcends these political differences, these notions of identity? Could better education for everybody, medical medicine, transport, jobs, and so forth be the route forward to building this reconciliation? Maybe, maybe not, but I think that these are the types of discussions that the NLD and whoever's in government is going to have to be thinking about in the years ahead.
All right, thank you for that. And so I want to extend our thanks to all of the panelists today and their insightful comments. Just in closing, I'll just note, so as a scholar of development studies from my side, one of the sobering cautionary warnings that Myanmar should observe is that the track record of hybrid regimes has been one of great instability, and particularly in situations of transition politics. The record of hybrid regimes is that they actually are more unstable than pure military regimes or pure democracies. And that so at the moment, Myanmar is in one of the most unstable situations possible. And the reason why hybrid regimes tend to be unstable is because they tend to allow stalemates between different factions and polarization of politics. They also tend to allow elite capture so that the instruments of the government end up benefiting only one particular group of people. Also, they do not address the peace dividend. They tend to, they allow different factions to entertain the idea that violence is still a legitimate way of resolving differences. So Myanmar will have to be very cautious about these potential dangers going forward into the future. And as the speakers have noted, that it's important to address the concerns of the people so that they feel that their problems can be resolved peacefully through the political institutions of the current system, or at least a new system that is responsive to their concerns. My final thanks I'll issue to Nick Cheeseman and to Naomi Oxenham. To Nick Cheeseman for moderating the questions and helping help us keep track of the audience concerns. And then to Naomi Oxenham for being the tech support behind the scenes and for tireless efforts to keep us on track. So thank you, Naomi. Thank you to the College of Asia Pacific for hosting this, and thank you to the audience for your questions, your attention, and hopefully you found this session entertaining. So thank you and have a good day.